Mohican, Part 2. He'd seen the contempt in her eyes as she'd looked down on him, appraised him, dismissed him for what she thought he was, not for who he was. Typical fucking upper middle class behaviour, judging a book by its cover, sticking to their own. Every time he saw her stare at him like that, he wanted to... Wanted to what? With her aristocratic roots and her public school education, she'd be first up against the wall come the revolution. She was the enemy. But he knew, God, he knew, that every time he saw her stare at him like that, he wanted to kiss her, touch her, cherish her. He wanted to breathe her in, explore her, satisfy her. Not that she'd want him to, God no. Sure, posh ones like her probably fantasized about the gardener's prowess. But in reality, they always hooked up with Tarquin, their second cousin once removed. He looked at her and unfurled his middle finger, and enjoyed the look on her boyfriend's face as he did so. That floppy hipster hairstyle and those skinny jeans. What a wanker. But again, Tony knew that deep down that hatred was mostly jealousy. Jealous that that weed had managed to get the most beautiful girl in uni. That was unfair. Kirsty was just as beautiful, and Tony loved her. But that posh girl was so sexy, whereas sometimes Kirsty forgot she was a woman. Everything was so right on with her that she'd managed to almost desexualize herself. She had the curves and she had the looks, and boy, under the bedclothes she had the moves, but to get to them you had to strip off the metaphorical layers of ideology and the literal layers of baggy, shapeless clothes. Tony was conflicted. He knew the sexualization of women was the exploitation of women, but he loved to admire those posh, stocking-clad legs in those black high heels. God, what would this crowd of raggle-taggles and hangers-on think if they could read his thoughts? They'd disown him, send him to Coventry, call him a traitor. It was stupid, really. Him and his group rallied against sexism, racism, homophobia, but they were quite willing to discriminate on the grounds of class. Bloody hypocrites they were. Tony ran his hands through his mohican and returned his thoughts to the conversation going on around him. The posh girl was just a pipe dream, a fantasy. She'd never give him the time of day. She'd made up her mind about him long ago. Let's face it was never going to happen, and he smiled at Kirsty. He didn't really want it to.